I had settled on the fundamental narrative principle of living my life without narrative principles, of letting life as I found it be my one and only guide toward a life of better feelings and growth and expansion, in the hope, I suppose, of meeting my doom with an ample supply of improbable blessings. You'll no doubt need time and a wealth of experience to discover some of the nuances of professional investing. But in the meantime, we'd suggest you keep your thoughts to yourself because life isn't nearly as logical as you think. It's stuffed full of donkey pronoun problems and counterfactual conditional if then puzzlers and non monotonic inference relations that can't quite cope with these modal gray zones. Life, in short, is a logical nervous wreck, and real world fraud is best left to trained professionals. Words, more and more words. Do we need all these words? Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today we are talking about Jim Gauer's novel Explosives. This is the second edition. The first edition came out in 2017, and it is special to this channel because it is the very first book that I reviewed on this channel. It's my very first video when I decided to finally, sally forth into this mysterious land of YouTube. And at that time, I mean, I had no contact with anybody in the literary world, literally. And now here we are 3 years later, almost 4 years later. But now this new edition has my afterword, which is really unfathomable to me. And really, if it hadn't have been for starting this channel, this never would have happened. So it's a real testament to the power of today's technology, which is something that I usually spend my time railing against, even though I'm complicit in that my day job is in IT. I do have to admit that without it, this never would have happened. So anyhow, you've probably heard me talk on this channel before about how I listened to Jim Gauer's interview on Bookworm back in 2017, and by the end of it, I had ordered the book. I knew I had to read this book that was being talked about, and then I read it. I loved it, and then I listened to the podcast from the Great Concavity, the episode with Jim Gauer. I'll put all these links down in the description, by the way. And I just reached out because at the end of that episode, Jim Gauer put it out there to just reach out to him, and I did. And then we went back and forth with emails, and next thing you know, I was asked to do the afterword, which really is unthinkable. I mean, especially thinking of the people that were clearly more adept and more notable than I. But this is also a testament to Jim Gauer's character. He's a very generous guy, and he took a real risk asking someone like me to do the afterwards. So I'm very thankful, and as such, I will be giving away a copy of the new edition. At the end of this video, I'll let you know how to enter that drawing. I just want to put it out there. As I said, I kind of have this dual life where it's kind of one foot is in technology and engineering and computer science, and the other foot is in literature and the humanities. And it's sort of always been that way for me. I started in the IT field at 15, but even before that, I had gotten really interested in web development at the time. And I remember going at I think about 13 years old. My grandmother took me to the Wheaton Plaza in Wheaton, Maryland, which is now called something totally different, like Westfield Shopping Center or something. But at the time, we went to a little bookstore, and I got her to buy me a copy of Sam's Learn HTML in 24 hours, and I just loved it. I remember the ride back home, just already digging into it, and I just loved this world of of code, this language that was totally different from spoken language and had all these special characters in it, braces and semicolons. Well, I guess that's not special language, but anyway, brackets and braces and tags, you know. And I saw this as just another type of language that then this machine out there crunches and processes and interprets and then presents meaning out of it. And that was kind of the start of it. And but I was already a big reader at the time, so it's always been that way. I've got my bachelor's in computer science and my master's in literature and writing. As it turns out, Jim Gauer is much in the same vein, although to a degree way farther than mine. But he studied under Hugh Kenner at Johns Hopkins for his PhD in literature in the English department. And but Hugh Kenner recognized some real writing talent in Gauer, and Kenner's advice was for him to do something completely different. Just to don't waste your time on this. Go and do something else. Learn to make money. And so Jim Gauer would go into the IT field, and he has been very successful, and lots of stories and experience behind all kinds of companies and so on in the technology industry. And you'll see a lot of that come into this book, Novel Explosives. So anyhow, he sort of has the same affinity as I do. And that really comes out in the book. You'll see the two-sided love of literature and deep immersion and knowledge of engineering and technology in many different facets. So in a way, I think that I am the ideal reader for a book like this. The way it's written employs a lot of mathematics. It employs a lot of computer science. For example, there's a character that's introduced very early on, Gabriella, or Our Lady of the Balcony, as it's humorously put. But she does everything in this weird order where she does things, backwards, forwards, or the other way you can think of. But anyway, as soon as I read this, I thought, oh, this is a philo stack. In computer science, that's first in, last out, or you could call it LIFO, last in, first out. And but then, of course, later on, this is explicitly stated in the book. It is explicitly tells us that this is a LIFO or philo stack. So anyhow, I really engage with that. There's a lot of recursion and looping. There's even what in mathematics is called a pons asinorum. Is hinted at. You don't necessarily have to be acquainted with all these things, though, because like I said, I recognized the philo stack system with Gabriella, but then it ended up being told to us. And one thing you'll find with this big book, as opposed to a lot of maximalist fiction out there, is that Jim Gauer really takes care of the reader, possibly to a fault. But I see this as making the net cast for the audience wider. But he really takes care of us. There are certain times when everything that's happened thus far is reiterated really quickly, like these little overviews or catch-ups, or he brings us along and doesn't let us get completely bewildered. That's not the point of this text. The point of this text is not to elude the reader and make us work overly hard. Jim Gauer, in one of, maybe on I-94 or one of his interviews, he talks about reading as an extreme sport. I think that's for sure a good analogy for reading some of these big works, but not for Novel Explosives. In general, what is going on here in Novel Explosives is an appropriation and instantiation of bits of Hegel, especially his dialectical model of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and Wittgenstein, the epigraph to the whole book, is that to imagine a language is to imagine a world, and there's this three-sided Venn diagram, you can picture it, of language and identity and reality, and how they're all interconnected. And so Jim Gauer is really interested in language as constituting a reality. And for each of our principal characters, that will very much be the case. Reality is everything that is the case, and that features prominently in here explicitly lots of Wittgensteinian aphorisms and philosophical notions. But then the other part of it is Pessoa. And the conscientious reader will think of Jose Saramago, especially the year of the death of Ricardo Reyes, and the use of Pessoa's heteronyms, as he called them. The one that features in this book is Alvaro de Campos. And Alvaro de Campos, he is the one who lived in the UK, and he always questioned his existence. And anything he knew of his existence was gleaned from external objects or given to him. None of it was really innate. He didn't feel that he really owned any awareness of his existence. And this is brought chiefly in right from the beginning. It could be said in a way that in this book, language, identity, and reality are an eternal golden braid. There's also a lot of social commentary. The femicides in Juarez are brought in here, but please don't think Roberto Bolaño, 2666. It's nothing like that. But Gauer did spend a lot of time down in Juarez. A lot of the stuff that's in here was gleaned from his real life endangerment, sort of a William T. Vollmann ploy here to go down and really immerse himself in the locales about which he's going to write. But there's social commentary on Juarez drug cartels and the war on drugs, which is really a biting commentary on that. And he talks about, this is a war on impersonal chemicals. Why are we declaring a war on drugs? Great quote. It says that man doesn't have a drug problem, man is a drug problem. But then also the huge disparity between the extremely wealthy and the extremely poor, how this can really be and how we should even think about it. Thinking about the unthinkable, really. At the beginning of this video, I did 3 different excerpts, and that's because I wanted to do an excerpt from the 3 chief characters in the book. The very first character is Alvaro de Campos, and we open with him. He's the one who has awakened in Guanajuato, Mexico, with no idea of who he is. But all of this information, like everything he's learned by rote, all this factual information, a very Wittgensteinian world as outlined in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. So he remembers all these scientific facts and all this stuff about finance and all this stuff about literature, but he has no sense of who he is. And when he looks at different objects, there's no personal attachment. And so he has to start basically from a tabula rasa as far as his identity is concerned. This also reminded me of Umberto Eco's novel, The Mysterious Flame of Queen Ilona, or Leona. Now I can't remember what the queen's name was. But anyway, the same kind of plot goes on in that book, but they're 2 totally different books. Anyhow, so kind of like he's seeing when he sees Gabriella in the opening scenes doing the Philo system of going backwards from the last out, he has to construct his identity in the same manner. He has to step backwards from all of these different clues that he finds. So there's this parallel and mirrored Philo stack going on. And so we actually get to watch the construction of an identity through language, through the language that is at his disposal, or what Richard Rorty would call the final narrative. So anyhow, Alvaro de Campos, he's awakened here. He has no clue how he got there. He's got a big bump on his head. And then he sees this picture of himself at dinner with these really grim-looking figures. And he ends up going with Gabriella to meet her uncle, I think it is, who works at the HSBC there. And then he finds he has this duffel full of all this money and these gold bars. And, he can't figure out how in the world does this happen. Well, then we switch over to the venture capitalists. And this venture capitalist is just such a real, raw character. He's drinking, he's up on the 17th floor of this skyscraper in Los Angeles, and he's this super successful venture capitalist who sits at a desk that costs as that costs as much as a Lamborghini, and he's been commissioned by his publishers to write his memoir. But at the same time, he's just drinking and doing drugs, and he's got writer's block in a way because there is a poet piece of him that is missing, and he is very much aware of the fact that it has sort of just gotten up and left. And right from the very beginning, pretty much, of all of this, we start to see that what Gauer's doing here is he has split apart these two identities. So Alvaro de Campos, or the poet, and then the venture capitalist seem to be the same person. And we also see that the way that the narrative time is working is it's not linear. We're starting at the end of the week and then backing up earlier into the week. And we'll keep going back and forth like that, which makes for a great experience of keeping the story fresh, but also giving us this parallax, which I've talked about here and there, where we will see the same scene from different points of view, and scenes will converge in such a creative way that you will just grin and say, every now and then, because you'll notice something from an earlier scene when different figures start to converge. But anyway, part of the fun of this book is how in the world Gauer is going to juggle having these kind of split personality into seemingly two different physical instantiations. How is this going to work? And then finally, there is Eugene and Raymond, the two gunmen that are hired by Gomez to go and find this guy, basically, to go and hunt down this guy that's got this duffel bag full of money. And so this all kicks off with this three-stranded plot. I talk about it in my afterword. I liken it to a trefoil plot or a trefoil knot, where it's these three different strands, but they're knotted together and pull on each other. And it just makes for great fun. And I found it completely engaging just at the plot level, because eventually, right before part 3, we get this incredible short chapter where identities begin to converge, and we're pretty far into it, and we finally get introduced to a scene that we haven't read about yet. And all of the way that this is done, the pacing, everything is so deliberate and so crafted. Gauer's talked about how he worked on this for 7 years and actually lost a year in there because he had to cut out 100 pages and redo it to make things work. But there's enough going on in here just at the plot level and character level to where reading this the second time was immensely enjoyable. I can honestly say that it reads even better on a second reading. It opens up with the story of how I came to live in Guanajuato. Guanajuato is a fascinating one. Fascinating. And so right here, you'll see that this is echoed. This sentence, and especially this repetition of fascinating, is echoed several times throughout the text. But the double repetition in the first place, that being Guanajuato, Guanajuato, and fascinating, fascinating, is our cue that we're dealing with doublings and splittings. It opens up told in the the first-person voice of Alvaro de Campos. He says, "I am, after all, in all probability, somewhere in my mid-50s, and no one comes to be living somewhere in his mid-50s without having had a prior life." And so there's this wry, playful voice that's going on here that really reminded me of the voice of Bras Cubas from Machado de Asis's great book. He said, "These associations did not in any sense belong to me. They belonged properly to the bird." He's seen this bird. "I don't want to convey the impression that I was uninformed or ignorant. To the contrary, I seem to know quite a lot of things. It's just that none of the things I knew belonged to me. My own knowledge was not in any way a personal possession." So in terms of philosophy, what Alvaro de Campos lacks is qualia. He has the facts, but there's no feeling of what it's like. There's no qualia. And this is very much an austere or severe Wittgensteinian world. As the venture capitalist character tells us when he first comes on the scene, "I was already, give or take, two distinct people. One, a practiced businessman with a creative flair for mendacity, and the other, a published poet, slowly dying of the usual self-inflicted truth. So there again, this is page 46. We're tipped off to this splitting and this doubling. And this venture capitalist is such a wicked and unashamed about it character. He says, one of my new partners, in fact, one of the firm's two founders, a man of such pure and unalloyed greed that wealth and possessions had long ago lost all meaning, leaving him with a vicious streak, common among the greedy, for whom success means nothing unless those around them fail. This is really so much biting commentary on the whole realm of our reality, where there are people who are literally preying on the poor to become more and more and more wealthy. But for all this, there's this great moment where we are told that Don Quixote was actually the quintessential VC, or venture capitalist. How will you feel when you're reading it? Well, here's a clue. Ray felt like he'd landed in the middle of some man's story without having heard a word of it, and with a storyteller who'd vanished abruptly, leaving Ray to make sense of the man's story for him. At the end of this extremely lavish dinner in this expensive steakhouse, I think it's called Delmonico's in Texas, it is said the evening will end up in a 2-foot stack of expense reports from similar occasions, sitting atop the lucite desk of some low-level accountant at, let's say, Goldman Sachs or Credit Suisse, whose job it is to make the evening itself disappear, write it off to T&E, as if it never happened, as it is, after all, in relation to their profits, vanishingly trivial, a rounding error. And it's absurd how much money these people make, and what that does to certain types of personalities. But it isn't all language. Like I said, it's the triad, language, identity, reality, and they're all pulling together. Part of that is the geological bearing on a personality. For example, just who do I think I am? Where on earth am I? These, in essence, were the exact same question. Guanajuato and I were ontologically intertwined. Guanajuato, in some sense, was only what I'd made of it, and I, of course, was what Guanajuato had made of me. And this is something I've talked a lot about that is a major preoccupation with William T. Vollmann, and is why he always goes and immerses himself firsthand in these places and with the people he writes about. Another element that I love about the book is there is a lot of humor. A lot of it is sardonic, wry, but it's great. For example, at one point, a character gets his chest slashed open in a horrifying red X, and the only place that this person can go is to a veterinarian clinic, and this makes for all kinds of hilarious moments where he's taking goldfish antibiotics and cocker spaniel sedatives and all this kind of stuff, and it's this big guy, and all he has at his disposal is stuff that would be used on domestic animals, and it's hilarious. At one point in this deeply philosophical moment, just eating food, he says, "I was about to fly off into an infinite series of pure spin spherical harmonic tensors with simple eigenvalue connections for deriving the spherical harmonic expansion of gravity potential when it occurred to me that I'd be better off just staring at my fork." So it's like this bathos. There's a moment when the gunmen are driving through and they're looking at these places in Juarez, this place where all the maquiladoras are, and they're referred to as a building that even now was slowly refilling with the hardworking minions of Pennies Shaved and Pauper Labor Incorporated and Remorseless Flows of Bottom Feeder Capital Unlimited. As the venture capitalist is trying to decide on a title for this tell-all or this memoir, he says, how about a fast-paced and volatile inside story of a former venture capitalist turned onco-ontologist entitled, "Sorry This Happened, I Just Couldn't Contain Myself." But just as Ray was readying an n-dimensional Hilbert space whose scalar inner product would be a standard permission form, he discovered that it was simpler just to take a wild guess. So I love again how Gauer is employing this really deep knowledge of engineering and computer science and mathematics, but in such a humorous way. He's aware of what makes it funny, and he's using bathos and irony to a great degree. There is something about the color lavender that does not contribute to a sense of reality. These might be Swiss banknotes and real-world currency, or maybe I was planning to build a hotel on Park Place. I love that. It's full of great anecdotes. There's an anecdote on Harold Bloom and having memorized Hart Crane's The Bridge and being able to recite it backwards. There are anecdotes on Pessoa, on Cervantes, and so many others. There's a short history of drug use and the history of Mexico and Hidalgo and the silver mining and into the war on drugs, drug cartels. There are two different time dilation scenes that are my favorite parts of the entire writing because I've never read anything like it. Literally, time slows down to the femtosecond. And we start, and the reason this is done is usually to then start to investigate a concept that comes up in here a lot, and that of human intent versus, so in terms of a weapon or a gun, when is the separation of firing a gun at someone? How do we trace that back to human intent and will? And when is that imputed into the impersonal mechanism itself? And there's more to it than just that. But the two-time dilation scenes, this is something I think I've seen with Lars von Trier in some of his movies, or maybe Christopher Nolan. David Lynch has one, but none of them, even cinematically, go down to the level as what happens here. I think one of the crowning achievements of the book is also the narrative voices. So these three different voices that we get, we love them and we want to keep reading them because Alvaro de Campos is our blank slate everyman. He's innocent. He's blissfully ignorant. He's, in a way, given a chance to start over. JB, or the venture capitalist, or douchebag as he's come to be called. This guy is just so raw and so real that even though he's done lots of ethically unsound things, we can't help but want to hear him keep talking and tell these inside stories. And then Raymond is this criminal tough guy, but he has a conscience. Everybody loves that character. Gauer's use of technical vocabularies is not just to show off, but it is a blending or a mixing of, again, the Wittgensteinian world as the language that we know being its limits, and then also Foucault's theory of areas of discursivity. To wrap this up, I'll just read a paragraph from my afterword in the back of this new edition. If you find yourself tempted to make comparisons, take a moment to consider the real extent of potential analogs. Yes, this is another one of those big, sprawling, wrist-punishing books with an appeal that, to some, is incomprehensible. But at the same time, it is not just another dense doorstopper offered up to challenge or to daunt, or both, depending on the would-be reader's disposition. David Foster Wallace, with his relentless vocabulary and hyperactive cognition, comes to mind, as does William Gaddis's insider knowledge of the culture of cutthroat capitalism. Thomas Pynchon, with his signature triad of paranoia, conspiracy, technical jargon, is near at hand. Joseph McElroy and Richard Powers, with idiosyncratic prose and interdisciplinary interests, are kindred spirits, certainly. Roberto Bolaño's obsession with the Juarez feminicides is an inevitable comparative, yet ultimately mismatched. Even William T. Vollmann as intrepid researcher and deft observer of people and place, and Sergio de la Pava's intermixing of on-the-job experience, philosophy, and humor are apt. Yet none of the convenient predecessors quite fits novel explosives. This is because this book is not derivative of, but the next link in a particular tradition, the continuation of a conversation. As Michael Silverblatt said of the book in his 2017 interview with Jim Gauer, it's not trying to be something, it is something. All right, so now the free giveaway. If you would like me to send you a copy of this new edition of novel explosives. Simply leave a comment. I don't care what you say. Just leave a comment. Either way, I hope that you check out the book. This is really a unique experience, and I already can't wait to read this for a third time. It's just fun to read.